Welcome to the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report. I'm Amy Zawi. Thank you for joining us for this two-part interview series with Malcolm Hedding to examine and expose the history of the Durban Conference, also known as the UN World Conference to Combat Racism. Malcolm Hedding, expert on the topic, shares his wisdom about the history and ramifications of the Durban Conference just now having its 20-year anniversary event. Learn why it is anti-Semitic and why Christians and all those who support Israel and Jews should be keen to its intent and outcomes.
Thank you, Malcolm Hedding, for joining us today and donating a bit of your time to enlighten our viewers on the issue of the Durban Conference, whose 20th anniversary is upcoming. For those of you who are not aware of what the Durban Conference is, or the UN Council, World Council to Fight racism, excuse me, it is an important factor for those of us who are supporters of Israel, because there are some issues that many people don't understand regarding the intent and the outcome of the Durban Conferences over the years in its hostility, to say the least, towards Israel. So I'm going to introduce to you all Malcolm Hedding, our dear expert on the topic, a native South African and a resident of Israel right now, correct? Malcolm, you're living in Israel?
Exactly.
Okay, Malcolm, you can please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get right into our topic.
All right, thank you so much, Amy, and it's a wonderful joy to join you and all our viewers today on this very, very important and essential topic. I am a minister of the Assemblies of God of Southern Africa. I entered the ministry in 1975. I am a church planter. I planted churches throughout Southern Africa. And in 1975, in that same year, I joined one of the first Christian Zionist movements in contemporary history, and that is Christian Action for Israel, CAI, which was a South African-based Christian Zionist movement. In 1986, I left for Israel, where I joined a church plant in downtown Jerusalem that was then called the Jerusalem Christian Assembly. Today it's known as King of Kings Church in the Pavilion. So I was on the pastoral team of that ministry, and at the same time involved at the Christian Embassy as its chaplain and also in other capacities. I left for South Africa again in 1990, and I came back to Israel in the year 2001, and in January, in fact, and became the executive director of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. Today, I serve on its board, and I am the international spokesperson. That's it.
Well, I'm sure there's much more that we would love to know, but that was a great summation. So thank you for that. And we value your expertise so much on this topic. So can you just maybe quickly tell our viewers, what is the Durban Conference? Some of our viewers might be seeing headlines in the news and not quite understand its context as far as how it would relate to us as believers who support Israel.
Yes, well, this is the background. The World Conference Against Racism, which was coordinated by the United Nations, first took place in Durban from the 31st of August to the 8th of September 2001. And supposedly the agenda was to combat racism throughout the world in all its forms and shapes. And so that was the basic idea. However, it turned out to be a little different in that the conference was riddled with anti-Israel resolutions, propaganda, and an attempt to delegitimize the Jewish state. Now, there is a background to this, I think, that is quite essential for our viewers to understand, and that is that in 1975, the enemies of Israel, by virtue of their voting bloc in the United Nations, pushed through a resolution number 3379, whereby Zionism was actually called racism. And this seriously undermined the fledgling state of Israel and essentially discredited the nation. Zionism is understood that the land of Israel is the everlasting home of the Jewish people. And if Zionism is therefore racism, you can see, and our viewers can understand, how that resolution undermined the Jewish state completely. Now, in 1991, on the 16th of December, that resolution 3379 was reversed. And that was particularly due to the wonderful efforts of one of Israel's most famous politicians, foreign minister, and ambassador to the United Nations, and that was Abba Eban, a real giant of a man in terms of international relations. He was, in fact, born in South Africa. And that was a major setback for the anti-Israel movement. In fact, it was a sledgehammer that basically legitimized Zionism, legitimized Aliyah, legitimized Israel's place in the world, and put her on an international stage that was accepted by all, including the United Nations. So that was a game changer in all respects. However, it was a great setback for the anti-Israel lobby and constituency in the United Nations. And so after the fall of apartheid, then it was decided that South Africa and Durban in particular would be the best place to launch another initiative against racism worldwide. If you read the resolutions and everything, there is a lot in it that we can agree with in terms of trafficked women and children and all of these issues. But actually, the camouflaged and central platform of that first conference in Durban was to launch a renewed attack against Israel and to somehow repair the damage that the reversal of Resolution 3379 had caused. It was during that period in the 90s, by the way, that there was an escalation in the charge against Israel that she was an apartheid state. So they had notched up the pressure. And so the Durban Conference was held. And that's the sort of background.
Okay, great.
The whole thing. Yeah.
And I think that's so important that you share that, because a lot of folks who have the best of intentions and are trying to learn didn't understand that component, that anti-Zionism, anti-Semitic component. They just think it's another initiative to combat racism, combat discrimination, and provide equal rights for people all over the world. So as the Durban Conference came to pass, the first one, and then there was a second one, and that sort of built up momentum a little bit among Zionists, because it was now right out there how just anti-Zionist it was. What was the progression then in the last 20 years of that conference series? Because now we're seeing in the news, certain nations are boycotting it and are outspokenly boycotting it, and other nations are part of it. Can you let us know a little bit about which nations are boycotting it and which are supporting it still?
The journey from that first initial conference is interesting, because as I stated a moment ago, it was a real setback in a way, because the United States of America and Israel withdrew from the first conference. And when that happened, when you have the world superpower, at that time it was a catastrophe for the conference, because the Soviet Union, as we knew it, and now called Russia, the Soviet Union had just collapsed in 1989, 1990. And so the fact that the world's only superpower stepped off the stage of the Durban Conference was another serious setback for this attempt through the conference to delegitimize Israel. They have a three-pronged attack system, and our viewers need to know it. It's this: first of all, to discredit Israel. And if you can discredit Israel, you can delegitimize Israel. And if you can delegitimize Israel, you can dismantle Israel. So the Durban Conference, suffering the loss of the United States in particular was a great setback. From that time onwards, the progression through the two other conferences that followed, that is 2 and 3, was characterized by the launch and the presentation of the BDS movement worldwide. It's important for people to know that. So having had these two remarkable setbacks, the rescinding of the racism resolution, and secondly, the fact that the world superpower dropped this conference, and so its importance and its power was diminished, they then resurrected another type of smear to bring to the people of Israel worldwide, and that is the boycott, disinvest, and sanction Israel. And that you well know, because we've all been fighting that, Amy, and we've been standing up against it. And its impact on Israel has been zero in terms of sanctions, in terms of limiting its economy. But the BDS movement is a very vociferous anti-Semitic movement, and its impact on the world, especially on college students, university students worldwide, has actually been great, as it has brainwashed their minds with anti-Semitism and legitimized on the colleges and universities of the world the idea that you can openly attack Israel and you can resist people who stand up for her in those halls of learning. So in the interim, the other two conferences had little impact on the world again. Actually, they came and they went. But the BDS movement was flowing out of it and continued this subtle attack against Israel and the Jewish people until we get to the conference that is taking place now. In these days, that this is, of course, Durban 4. And this constituted another attempt to bring these matters together and somehow launch another major attack on Israel. Because for them, the climate worldwide is good, because anti-Semitism is growing everywhere from continent to continent. I mean, today I'm also a United States citizen, so I understand that even in our beloved country, there is this growing anti-Semitism everywhere. And I saw a report today that Jews are still the most attacked people and vilified people in the United States of America, of any minority. So that's a very sad thing.
It's very sad.
Please join us next week, Wednesday, September 15th, for the remainder of this valuable interview with Malcolm Hedding.